Alright, so I'm going to try and explain how brain damage, or I guess just neurological differences in the way certain people's brains may work differently from one person to the next in regards to birth defects and choking and things of that nature. Okay, so basically in my last video I basically explained how perhaps the brain, the memory isn't actually stored anywhere. It's just a bunch of electrical connections going around and round repeatedly, constantly moving, because there's nowhere to set it at any given point. So if you have trauma to the brain, or you cut the stem or damage it, it does not repair because the neurons are damaged, and basically those electrical impulses dissipate into, the air around it, per se. And therefore you never get it back because it's implanted in you, and you are taught that through the electrical impulses of basically your mother. Now, if you want to know more about that, watch my last video. But this one's the second part to that. So, under the assumption of that theory, and this is my own theory, I don't, know if it's accurate or not. I have no idea at all. I'm not a very well-versed scientist or neurologist or anything really, but I felt like this is just one of my pondering moments. Alright, so under the assumption of that theory, say a mother has brain damage or some sort of impairment, and they have a child. Now, the child theoretically could basically come out any way mentally, but I think it's more about what parts of the brain that are impaired or damaged, of which determines whether or not your child will come out with certain parts of their brains intact, not intact, but non-damaged, or better than per se others naturally. Because, okay, under the theory, if your brain gets damaged in any way, whether it's be hit in the head with a baseball bat as a child, you bumped your head by accident, fell downstairs, and then if you're the mother and you get pregnant, well, then you pass on the genetic mapping of the brain and the electrical impulses into the infant as it's developing inside of your womb. So, say you hit your head once in your life. Now, this is where it gets complicated and extremely complex. Say, after that day, you had trouble with part of the motor part of your brain. You're not as fast with reflexes as you once were. Well, your brain, the electrical impulses that you'd be passing on to your child's brain for motor sensors may be semi-impaired. And therefore, when you pass that part of the mapping down, perhaps the child ends up with that damaged part. Or perhaps you still have all control of your motor skills, but the part of the brain that's damaged is the part which actually knows what to do and where to send. It damages the impulse and releases the impulse into nothing. Certain areas of the brain that basically give your child motor skills or certain ability of motor skills. You may be fine, but because the damage of your brain may not be damaged in keeping your motor skills, but perhaps it destroyed a piece of your brain that knows how to transfer motor skills to your child. And therefore, if your child would come out somewhat feeble and impaired. Perhaps, oh, hiss yourself. Sorry, kitty cat. Perhaps you fall as a child, and it works the opposite way too, perhaps. I mean, under this theory it does, definitely. But perhaps you lose your motor skills as a child and due to a head injury or something, but then you have a child and it comes out with perfect motor skills. This is why I say it gets complicated. Because we can't really measure what electrical impulses hold what information. So one part of the brain being damaged may release your ability to give certain electrical impulses of which your child's brain will need. And perhaps it will only, if you get hit in the head, it will only damage what part of your motor skills or part of the brains you need, but it will retain the information to pass on the parts of your child's brain that needs to function. So, say you're completely retarded and you have a child, there's no 100% guarantee that your child will come out even mildly retarded, because perhaps in your retardation it's only impaired your mapping to your specific traits and abilities of the brain, but you still retain the electrical impulses to pass on a perfectly healthy genetic brain to your child. So, therefore, your child could end up not retarded at all, but your child could also end up retarded if something happens, if your brain is somewhat damaged, and you may be perfectly fine altogether, but your child could end up mildly or even severely mentally handicapped due to your brain's ability, the neurons in your brain, when you were mentally damaged but you didn't get affected. Perhaps the part that would pass the neurons onto your child's brain have dissipated and you no longer have some of those. Thereby, when you pass the neurons onto your child, your brain doesn't know what exactly to pass on in what order. So your child's brain is just a huge mess of unorganized, unsynchronized neurological impulses that don't have any idea what to do. Because they came from someone who they themselves had the part of the brain to keep them intelligent and them perfectly reasonable and intelligent, but they came from a person that's all they had. The part that was damaged was the part that they inherited from the mother. So say your great-grandfather was a brilliant genius, and you're wondering whether or not that might be genetic. Well, theoretically, yes, it could be. But due to any amount or number of traumas of which could have been sustained by your grandfather, may determine whether or not his brain has retained the electrical impulses to implant those neuron pathways in the way that it's taught to. Your grandfather may not have been damaged at all, but his ability to pass on the impulses that your father or mother needed may have been damaged. And then when you were born, something may have changed, Perhaps your father was now smarter than he was when he originally got the mapping, and there are new neuron pathways, and maybe something's corrected. Maybe he had bad memory that was passed down to him, but now he's really good at it because he's trained his brain. That may or may not pass down to you, depending on whether or not he's had trauma and lost his ability to pass specific things down to you due to losing neurons or neuron impulses. Okay, now as far as the trauma part, think of it like a computer, and the brain is just impulses flowing through millions and billions and trillions and quintillions and googles of wires. And every time you damage the brain, it's like cutting one of those wires. And in every one of these wires, a very specific electric current is running through, unlike any of the others that's performed a specific function. So when you damage the brain, you cut one of these by accident. Now, you don't know whether what is on this particular wire, but when you cut it, the electricity dissipates into the air and you can never get it back. So when you cut it, it may be your ability to pass down to your child their ability to see and connect their eyes to their brain and actually see colors or see at all. Or perhaps it's their ability to maybe even taste certain parts of there because of the neurons. It might have damaged the brain almost as a whole, and it might have damaged your brain's ability to send out neurons and receive neurons. Any possible thing could be on that. Or it might be something insignificant that several things depend on in order to do it. So you could end up paraplegic later in life due to some disease because your brain is missing the proper information to continually send out neurological impulses and tell you to move. So it's like that. And then as far as choking and things like that, well, consider it like an unstable current. Generally, consider it kind of like a surge, a lessening in the amount of supply of voltage given into the computer. So you have these currents that are infinitely just looping around and continuously moving all the time, and you're not cutting them. You're not cutting any of them at all. But then you lower the voltage, and basically that's like losing air. Your brain needs air. It's like lowering the voltage of the computer. So now you don't have enough voltage supply to continually run these currents, and some of them start to die out. They start to just stop running, and you can't get them back. Once the power is restored, new energy might be flowing through that wire, but it will never be the same exact current. So when you lose oxygen, you lose part of the current to flow the electrons, and so they start to die off because they simply cannot exist without the right components. They need something to fuel them. They can go on forever, but only as long as the rest of what is powering it can stay there with it. So, it may not just be the DNA of which is important in passing on genes and traits to your child. It could be certain neurological impulses. It could be your own mother's brain, of which, because the body doesn't do anything without the brain's input on something. It's basic. If your brain is dead, your heart does not pump. if your brain is dead, you do not think, you do not see, you do not hear. You simply, the electrons, or the electroneurons just dissipate. They slowly just evaporate into air and they're gone forever. This is why you can't just start a brain, because it's memorized from birth, because of the neuron mapping of your mother's brain. It's only able to function because it's been told how to function by a brain that's already doing it, and that knows how to. And the only way it will once again do that is when is if you, and the only way to map a brain is with a brain. It's taught by one that already exists. You cannot restart a brain, because in these electroneuronic pulses is not just electricity, it's your memories, it's what to do, what you know, it's everything that cannot be replaced. So when your brain is separated, these are gone. They die off. They are no longer contained in the brain. There's no power source. They escape through all of the nerves and all of the neurons, and they slowly die because they're snuffed out. There's nothing to keep them pumping and flowing. And then all your memories, all of what makes you you, all of what you know and what you can do is simply lost. Lost forever. You can't electrojolt it because that electricity was not implanted into you in the specific way in order for you to know what to do with it. You can pump all the electric currents through a brain you want, but it doesn't know what to do with them once it's done developing. It was taught in the beginning, and it cannot be retaught. It was taught as it was created, and it was created as it was taught, and it will create as it was taught. And that's just how it is. You cannot teach a brain, you cannot reteach a brain without a brain. You cannot simply take a brain out, hook it up to another brain that already works, and expect it to know what to do with that. Anyways, that's all I got. Anyways, I'll catch you later. Thanks for watching. Bye.